I'm Chuck Mills, co-host of Virginia Time Travel, and I'm here today with Andrew Mills, your other co-host. And our topic today is the well-dressed 18th century man. So welcome to our century.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, certainly your dress is rather peculiar, to say the least.
Well, it looks like you just came in from a storm.
Well, certainly storm, cold weather and heavy winds. The proper gentleman should always carry his great cloak with him in order to keep him warm. As most people think this would be a cape, this is actually made of wool, and as such, it's very warm in the winter time. In fact, you can go ahead and just wrap it around yourself a little bit, and this will enable you to stay warm. And the benefit for this one is I have two hooks, so I can go ahead and open it up so I can move my arms out more widely. Or if need be, if I want to stay a little bit more sedate, I can lock the second one into place, and then I look much more solitary. The other benefit is that when I'm carrying something, like let's say I carry a small bag or a lantern, nobody will really know what's under my cloak whatsoever, as long as I keep it tight into my hand. And so as I walk around, it works pretty well. And even on my shoulders, I have extra piece of fabric.
So now does this do double duty as a raincoat?
It can certainly act as a raincoat to protect you from the weather. It works very well as a whole. It does keep the rain out better than a frock coat or even a civilian coat. Certainly makes more sense to have one of these in colder or even wet weather as you try to stay dry to the best of your ability.
Well, take off your coat and stay a while.
Well, I don't mind if I do. It actually does get a little hot depending on the circumstances. Now, I should also note that a proper gentleman, depending on the company where he is in, will of course have a frock coat, much like what I'm wearing right here. Now this particular frock coat is actually double lined. It's got inside sewing on it as well. And so on a typically cool day, say if it's about 60 degrees outside, this will certainly suffice to keep you warm throughout the day, namely because you are dressed in layers. And with multiple layers on already, it will preserve a great deal of body heat for you, so you'll be safe.
Now, would you be the typical 18th century man, or are you a gentleman or a worker? Who are you exactly?
Who you are is greatly dependent on what you're wearing. In this particular case, the way I am looking, I would say I'm more of your continental soldier, probably went ahead and outfitted himself, would have been a militiaman himself, namely with a lot of the things. Now, in a case like this is just, one of those simple town folk who would have just come straight out from the farms or wherever and would have been doing that. A lot of that can be told just based off of what you're wearing. This isn't exactly an extremely expensive frock coat, but the collar certainly lends weight to the fact that I'm probably somebody of importance.
So if I wanted to outfit myself in a vest and a coat and a cape, I go down to the local men's store in Alexandria?
Well, no, not quite. In fact, one of the things is that you would have to go to a tailor for something along the lines of a coat or at least the waistcoat. That's something you would need a tailor for. Smaller products like, I say, a shirt or your breech or your stockings, you could probably make that at home or have the wife make it at home for you. The cloak as well would have to be bought through a tailor shop. You wouldn't have a wholesale market or anything like that in which to go ahead and buy your products whatsoever. In fact, wholesale itself doesn't show up until past 1900. And so it didn't make sense to go ahead and do this. You wouldn't get these specialty things made yet.
So how many sets of clothes would an 18th century man have?
It depends greatly on your class in society. If you're an upper class gentry member, you're going to have a number of pairs of clothing. You're probably going to have what you would say is your day-to-day wear, which case you might have 2 or 3 pairs there, and then some of your finer clothing, at least a couple pairs there. And then every so often you are buying a new piece depending on weight gain or weight loss, more gain than loss as the case may be. So it varied greatly on the individual. Now if you're poor, you're probably only going to have 1, maybe 2 pairs of everything, and you're really going to spend a great deal of time just patching everything back together. In fact, everyone, male, female, and children, would actually become very good sewers as over time, because they'd spend so much of their energy trying to go ahead and keep themselves looking proper.
Well, nothing says 18th century colonial like a tri-corner hat. So Tell me something about the hat.
True tricorn is something like you have here. Obviously, it goes ahead and shows a triangle form. In reality, the hat itself is just a wide brim round hat with the flaps folded up. You'll notice that we have nice little pieces of string here, which is tying it together, and it's all connected inside the hat itself.
So basically this was the hat the farmers wore, and when they came to town they tied it up?
Well, even farmers would have a tricorn hat because it did a very good job protecting from the weather. But if you wanted to go ahead and create, say, a straw tricorn, you might have your round hat and then just fold up fold up the edges. But one of the things that makes a tricorn hat rather important is going to be the cockade. Cockades themselves would represent many different things. Sometimes it represents political affiliation. Other times it could represent you're in a state of mourning. For instance, this one being a black cockade has multiple different angles to it. For instance, it could say I'm in mourning. Then again, during the American Revolution, it could say I'm one of Washington's own as part of an elite officer corps. Or alternatively, it could say during the Federalist era that I'm a Hamiltonian, supporting the British.
So it's like a political button.
Exactly. Except it would only be told by your hat, because putting something onto your clothing, not exactly recommended. So you would put it on the one place everyone was guaranteed to look at.
I understand gentlemen used to put things in their hat, used them as to carry documents and things.
Well, Doc, it's a little harder to go ahead and carry a document in this particular hat here. Not a lot of room. Even if I put it underneath, there isn't much space whatsoever. However, if I really wanted to go ahead and do something to cheat, what I could do is, say, if I were to take out a piece of continental currency, say, for instance, I have this piece here. This is an $8 piece, which comes from the state of, doesn't want to show itself. Pity. Oh, well. Anyways, what I could do is fold the piece over, and then if I fold it up just the right size, in this case like this, all I'd have to do is just have my hat and stick it through the loops as such. And there it is. I have my money ready to go, so if I have to go out, I can spend it.
So your hat was your wallet?
Well, it could be my wallet. There would be a straight wallet pocketbook that was used by gentlemen, very large. You could go ahead and place it inside of your pocket itself, or you might even go ahead and sew a little pocket inside. Although inside pockets, not exactly very fashionable. You'd leave it on the outside. Instead, what a proper gentleman would go ahead and have is more likely than not a coin purse. And so, with a coin purse, as is the case of right here, this would go ahead and enable you to go ahead and carry a great deal of money. Now, you can kind of hear the jingle of some coins, in which case I have quite a bit. And so, depending on where I go, if I pull out my coin purse, I would go ahead, have to pour out my coins, and then count away as to what piece I would need. And depending on what it is, I could go ahead and spend accordingly.
I see. Now, I notice you're wearing some kind of leggings. What are those exactly?
Now, in this particular case, this is what's called a gaiter. This is something that you would wear to go ahead and cover the tops of your shoes all the way up your shin bone and your calf muscle, and then just above the knee. Now, during the French and Indian War and the American Revolution, you would see a lot of soldiers wearing this particular piece. The gaiter, as you can see, has buttons that run along the side to go ahead from the bottom of the foot to just above the knee. And tied around it, you see this brown leather strap. Now, that is what's referred to as a garter. Now, in this particular case, you would need one, because if I didn't have it there, this gaiter will start to slip its way down.
Well, what were these things for? Just to make you look good, or?
Well, it certainly is kind of intimidating. I mean, imagine if you see a soldier with a rifle over his arm, just slung over, and here he is walking down the street, and you see this. And it has that appeal of, whoa, you better stay back. To the common man. But if you're out in the countryside, this would certainly be a very good piece to have to protect you while plowing your fields or doing any kind of handiwork, because say like a little chip of wood that goes flying about, it's going to hit the gaiter, and instead of going ahead and destroying your stockings, this will go ahead and keep it safe.
So you're wearing stockings under this?
Yes. In fact, underneath this is the stocking. So if I were to go ahead and simply undo this particular piece of the garter, where I undo the strap, what you find is, if I just take a hold of the top here, I can go ahead and pull, and there I expose my stockings. Now, one of the benefits of the garter, though, is that this particular piece is also used to hold up your stocking. So, and again, here's the great benefit and practicality. For instance, if your socks fall down, what do you got to do in order to pull them up? You got to lift your pants leg up. Now, for something like this, I have buttons all running down the sides just at my knee. So, if I undo the buttons like so, and usually you don't want to go too far up unless you plan on showing the ladies some of your knee, but pull it up, take my garter, tie it just below the knee itself, and then, as simple as that, now the garter is around my knee. And then all I have to do is rebutton the sides. My stocking shall not, under any circumstance, fall below the knee.
So I understand you have a new publication out called The Guide to 18th Century Gentleman's Dress.
The Gentleman's Guide to 18th Century Clothing certainly is a unique book in and of itself. What it does is it attempts to go ahead and look at specifically dress within the 18th century, and it gives everyone an idea of exactly what were these clothes that were being worn.
Now, I thought they always wore white stockings.
Well, white stockings are, of course, the preferred method. In this case, I have a nice dark blue one on. And as you can see with this dark blue one, what makes it rather unique is that it does match rather nicely with my waistcoat, because this too is dark blue. And so it is a nice fashionable piece. Now, depending on where you are, you can wear multiple color stockings. Doesn't matter. Doesn't have to be white. It's just that we always see white thanks to portraits. But a gentleman would go ahead and have varying colors, be it white, red, green, brown.
So would you say that white was for formal wear?
White is more formal than anything else. Also, white is silk, and it's very easy to go ahead and see through it. So you would only wear white on occasion.
Now, how often would they wash their clothes?
Washing depends. You usually want to definitely wash once a week at a minimum.
So they would wash the clothes once a week?
About once a week. Even today, we still wash our clothes about once every week. But you'd want
So you'd wear the same outfit for a week?
Well, you could wear the same outfit. Certainly the shirt is going to be worn the most. In fact, the shirt itself, as you can tell from my collar, is at my neck, but it doesn't end right here. The shirt actually extends all the way down to just above my knee. It's just that now that I'm wearing it, I've gone ahead and bundled it up so that it really stops right where my legs are joined to the rest of my torso. But it is a very long shirt, and it would double itself as a nightshirt. So you would vary when you're wearing this.
Now, I understand shoes were kind of a problem.
Well, shoes are kind of tricky because left and rights are not exactly very common in the 18th century. Instead, what you would have here in this particular shoe, this is what's called a straight lace shoe. This particular piece is going to be very generic in style of how you're wearing it. It's made of a material referred to as fugawee, F-U-G-A-W-E-E. And so this particular leather, this is a soft leather, and so when you wear the shoe, what will happen is that as your foot sweats, it'll soften the leather up so that it'll then conform itself around your foot. And so British manuals of war actually stated that soldiers were not permitted to switch shoes because the boots would conform itself to only one person's foot. So you had to keep your shoe the way it is. Now, a good person would go ahead and wear some buckles. You might have a silver buckle or a gold buckle or a copper buckle, depending on your wealth. Someone who wanted to fancy themselves a true gentleman might wear silver, a little bit more than gold, depending on the circumstance. But it usually does show a good sign of wealth.
And they're not just for ornamentation.
Well, no, it actually holds the whole thing together because what you have is two straps.
Can you show us?
Well, to take that off is a little bold on my path because once that happens, it's not going to, it would take almost forever to put it back together. In fact, when you put your shoe on and off, you'd almost just slip it off, simply put.
Okay, so you wouldn't undo the buckle every
Oh, no,
night.
no. You would
like
never want to undo it. Just make it a slip-on. But you'd place the buckle on there as a sign of respect because people would see that and say, ah, there's a rich man. So we must go ahead and remember our place towards him.
And if you had jewels on your buckle?
Well, you had, the more ornate, certainly the more wealthy you are. But in America, you wouldn't see it's necessarily so much as an ornate. Europe, definitely, especially when going to court, you would see this.
What about colonial governors?
Colonial governors might go ahead and wear that from time to time, but they would be a little bit more practical in their own approach.
Now I see you have a cane there.
Yes. Now, this particular cane, certainly looks very nice, very appropriate for a proper gentleman. Now, a gentleman would carry his cane with him as an extra tool, both for function and for protection, depending on the case may be. Canes were generally seen as very fashionable starting in the 1790s after England had banned the carrying of swords in public. And so you would carry a cane as something to put in your hand. Of course, some gentlemen realized that to put a sword in a cane would go ahead and suit both needs. You'd have a sword with you, but then you'd also have your cane. Also, the other thing is that what most people don't realize about these shoes is that the shoe itself, underneath, leather. It's just hardened leather. That's all it is. And so, realistically speaking, when you're walking, you don't want to walk very fast because it's very easy to slip and slide. But if you walk a little bit slower and you have your cane in hand, this will enable you to go ahead and keep your balance and walk at a nice, gentle, strolling pace.
So there were no speed walkers in the 18th century?
Well, if you wanted to speed walk, you're taking your life in your own hands a little bit.
Did they actually have to place their feet differently than we did, walking in those shoes?
Well, walking along in these, I have noticed that sometimes I myself have to go ahead and be careful. For instance, we always hear parents say, oh, almost lost my balance there, heel toe, heel toe. So you really want to go ahead and put your heel in there. But the thing is that when you're walking, the bottom of your foot is feeling this because there isn't much protection between the ground and your foot. And so when you read accounts of the American Revolution, how soldiers were losing their shoes.
In the mud, I imagine.
In the mud, and it just broke apart. And it's no small wonder these things would happen because they're just not built to take on a great deal of walking.
And even in the cities, you'd be walking on cobblestones.
Yes, you would. You'd walk on cobblestones. And so it isn't exactly uncommon to go ahead and see somebody take off their shoes and put on a slipper or something like that in order to walk around for day-to-day household chores. Mm-hmm. Because even with the Gator, as you can see, it isn't something you just go ahead and leave on for an extended period of time. You've got to take that off after a little while.
Now, I notice you're wearing a wig.
Yes, the wig is something that had been worn for a great deal of time throughout society. Wigs really became fashionable towards the end of the 1500s, early 1600s. Started actually with the King of France, who went ahead and wore it. Wigs could be made of a combination of human hair, horse hair, mule hair, all dependent on the type of wig and how much money you wanted to spend. Now, in this case, because the back of my wig, the tail, goes so far down and so large, this would certainly show that I have a great deal of money. Now, a proper gentleman would also buy powder for his wig, and he would powder the hair, so that as he powders it, he goes ahead and makes it look completely white. Now, if a little bit of powder were to get onto the shoulder, you would go ahead and just leave it there because it's a status symbol. It shows that you've got a great deal of wealth. But, so if you look at a portrait of a colonial gentleman, especially those of fashion, you say, why do they have dandruff all the time? It's not dandruff, it's powder. All they would actually have had to have done was just do this. But that's a social faux pas in the 18th century. You never do that.
So would a gentleman have multiple wigs or a wig for every occasion?
Well, a gentleman would certainly have at least one or two wigs depending on the circumstance and the wealth of the time. And it depends on where you are. Now, some men would just go ahead and grow their hair out naturally and then powder it that way. Washington did it, Jefferson did it, George Mason would eventually do it. But usually you have one or two wigs depending on the circumstance and your station in life. So it depended.
So why did they wear wigs?
Well, wigs, I mean, let's face it. One of the things that happened in 18th century society is that you get yourself a bad case of lice. And as such, you got to go ahead and shave your head in order to get rid of them. But do you really want to walk around being called baldy all the time? Of course not. So what do? You buy yourself a wig. And once you have it on, nobody would really know the difference. I mean, for my own natural hair color, you wouldn't really know. In fact, if I were to go ahead and remove the wig as such, you notice that my own hair right now is somewhat matted down because of the pressure that came from the wig itself. And so it looks rather unique. And based off the hair color, it's pretty close to my own. So for those who didn't know me, they would just think I naturally grew my hair out longer. But for those who do know me, they realize that I am wearing a wig. Now, proper wig maintenance and care does vary depending on who you are. Now, in a case like this is a rather simple wig, not very expensive, and so, simple care like filling the sink with a little bit of water and a little bit of shampoo, and you can go ahead and clean the wig as simple as that.
So the gentleman would go home and wash his wig in the sink?
Well, you wouldn't necessarily always wash it, but you might want to go ahead and be very careful in its maintenance. But a gentleman himself would never do it. A slave would do it.
Oh, I see. But at all classes they wore wigs, didn't they?
At all classes, yes, they did. They would wear a wig. Didn't matter who you were, rich or poor, you would wear a wig. The quality of the wig is what would matter. So that would depend greatly on where it is.
Now, does the color of the ribbon have any significance, like the cockade, or is it just
Not usually.
fancy?
Not usually. It's just a fancy little bit, something nice to go ahead and put on. Some gentlemen would even have a little bag that they would have to put their hair in, and then that would be on there, so you knew the hair was long, but you wouldn't necessarily go ahead and simply do it. The cockade is where the political alliances were really made.
Now, I notice you're wearing something that appears to be a tie. What is that?
Well, this is what's referred to as a neck stock. It isn't actually a tie. This is just a small piece of cloth. In this case, if I pull it out like so, you see it's not very long. Some would argue it looks a little bit like a bandana, but in reality, the neck stock, the original one, would just be a white piece of cloth that could be tied around your neck, and then it would just go ahead and hold the collar closed. Now, over time, you'd see the cravat, which would go ahead and be the precursor to the necktie that you're wearing right now. And so that would go ahead and be tied, and you could just place the edges underneath your waistcoat, and then over time, the cravat would be replaced by the necktie.
Now, did that have any practical function, or was it just decorative?
More decorative. I mean, the good practicality of this one is that if I'm getting extremely hot, I can go ahead and tie it around my head like a, a headband. That's about it.
Now, I noticed the buttons appear to be pewter.
Yes, they are. These are pewter buttons. Very good. They're sewn on. In fact, one of the things that you'll discover is that for the 18th century gentleman, sewing is a key must. You should know how to sew. Even today, if you wear these things, sewing is a must. In fact, this particular button right here was sewn on, and so the color of the thread is very different. And even some of the buttons on here have had to sew more than one occasion because they do get loose.
What are some of the things that we might find in the pockets of an 18th century gentleman?
Well, in this particular case, for this 18th century gentleman, there are some varying things. For instance, one thing that I've notoriously always carried with me, and you never know when you're going to need it, is a good old-fashioned candle. You never know when you're going to need one. I'm sorry. Come prepared, folks. That's my advice. But in reality, where you're really going to be carrying most of your money is going to be in the waistcoat pocket.
How would they light that candle?
How would they light that candle? Well, that's a good thing. Now, you see, for today, we can cheat and go ahead and use a match or a lighter. But if you want to go ahead and do it, depending on how adventurous you are, you could walk by somebody who's already got a lighted candle and cheat off of that. Or alternatively, you might have a little bit of a scratch stone, flint, where you go ahead and scratch the stone and light the candle that way. So it depends on how much time you have to afford for yourself. Now, for most gentlemen, one of the things they'd be carrying with them is a nice little tin case of snuff. Now, snuff is basically ground up tobacco, and what you do is you take a pinch of it and you put it up to your nose and you just sniff it in like that. Now, because it's ground up and you're sniffing it in, it's going to start sending that up towards the brain just a little bit, just to flirt with it, and then it's just going to be staying in your nasal cavity. Now, usually when you see some people, they'll take a little straw, stick it up in there, and really go. And so you say to yourself, gee, why are all those people in the movies looking as if they are rather high on drugs? That's because they are. So there's just no substitution for it.
Okay.
But snuff itself, depending on the gentleman, it's something some may have and others may not.
What other things do you have, if any?
Well, if any, one of the things that I do have with me is some good old-fashioned Continental currency, as I mentioned before. Also, one thing I do have, and if you want to be a bit of a scoundrel, is a good old-fashioned deck of cards. You can never go wrong. However, what most people don't seem to realize is that deck of cards, no numbers on there, no Ks, no Qs, no nothing. They just have the pictures on there because not everyone can necessarily read, but you could count. Okay, that's one thing you could always rely on. So if you go ahead and hold this card up, it's a 9. So you know what to do. And this one's a 3. Not so hard to do. Okay. Ace. Simple. 1. You don't really need to worry too much.
Well, this has been very interesting, and I'm sure if people want to learn more, they'll be interested in your new book, The Guide to 18th Century Gentleman's Dress. And For more information about that, please go to our website at www.timetravel21.com. We'd love to hear from you, so please send us emails at timetravel21@yahoo.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.